one of the most successful boy bands in history, selling over 20 million albums, setting the bar for all other boy bands after them, reaching a level of fame that no Latin American artist had up to that point. Menudo, a group like no other. This is a deep dive into the dark side of their history. Hi, my name is Natalie, and I cover cases from Latin America ranging from true crime, urban legends, cryptids, internet mysteries, rabbit holes, and more. Like and comment for support, and enjoy the video. So Menudo was created by a man named Edgardo Diaz back in 1977. And not much can be found about him. He has a very private life, but we do know that he was born in Panama in 1947, but lived most of his life in Puerto Rico. He eventually moved to Spain, where he got his first job as a sound engineer for another children's group named La Pandilla. And after a few years, he became their manager, right? So this group was like a children's group, and it was formed by 4 boys and 1 girl. And eventually, when the children grew, right, the group disbanded. And that's how Diaz got the idea of creating a group that would always stay young. This group had been very successful and made Diaz a household name. So obviously he wanted to create a group that would be aimed for like children, preteens, but without that constraint of time, so that the members would be always young, always children. And that's when he created this concept that he called once the Fountain of Youth. He said that he wanted to create a group that had like a rotational system. So the group would be constantly changing, constantly evolving, but staying forever young. New members, new energy, and when a member gets tired, there's a new one ready to take his place. This meant that the group would have a graduating type system, where the members would be changed as they grew older and be replaced with a new member, a new child to take their place and continue the group. And so the rules that he placed to change the members were like if either they just had a voice change, started to grow facial hair, grew too tall, their features matured, or they turned 16. If they had a check on any of those points in that list, they will be replaced by another child. So this is how Menudo was created. And Menudo is mainly separated by generations. So if you look up about Menudo, the information is usually packed into each generation, but there are so many. Like if one of the members was replaced, technically that would count as another generation. This group lasted for about 20 years, and they had over 30 members. So Menudo started with 2 sets of brothers. You have the Melendez brothers, who were 3, and their ages were like 10, 12, 11 years old. And then the Salaberry brothers, who were 12 and 13, right? And this was how Menudo was created back in 1977. And if you're wondering what does Menudo even mean, it has many meanings. Depending on which country you are asking, it can have different meanings, but in general, the word is kind of like saying that there's a boy who's really like skinny, like a small frame, but that moves very well, like dances very well. So they began promoting in Puerto Rico, and they had really small gigs at malls, parties, and different events. And when they released their first album, Los Fantasmas, it became their first hit. And after that, they began appearing on TV shows, and their fame slowly started to expand to other countries. So during the 80s, there were a lot of changes in the lineup. The 80s is considered the golden age of Menudo. And they released their album Quiero Ser, which gave them finally that whole new level of popularity that was Popularity created a new word. It was menuditis, and it was to refer to the incredible fame, to like the fever, the contagious fever that all these other kids were feeling for the group. Other artists at the time, and even now, will promote only one or two songs from each album, right? Menudo, during this time, was promoting every single song from their albums, and they were all becoming radio hits. They were releasing 2 albums a year, which is difficult even for artists now. They were selling all kinds of merch, making so much money. They were selling stickers, posters, keychains, shirts, temporary tattoos, pictures, and even the clothes they wore to music videos or stages, concerts, was being replicated and sold massively. There were even 2 movies made about them that the members starred themselves. They had their own TV shows, appeared in telenovelas, and during this era, right, the golden era of the 80s, Diaz, their manager, bought a private plane for Menudo. He bought the Lockheed Jetstar, which was previously owned by Richard Nixon, and he just printed Menudo on the side of it ginormous. They were the first boy band to own a private plane. So going back to the members, the formation was changing a lot, right? So many joined for just a month or two. Some of them joined only for weeks. There were many who were trainees for the group and never ended up debuting. They had multi-millionaire contracts with music companies, ads on ABC. They had even their own game show where fans would compete on who knew Menudo more. They sold over 20 million albums during the whole trajectory of the group. Like I said before, they lasted 20 years and they sold 20 million albums, though that's technically saying that they sold 1,000,000 albums per year. That's an incredible number. So during the 80s, a new member joined. His name is Robbie Rosa, and he joined when he was 14. He was born in New York, and with him, Menudo released their first album in English called Reaching Out. One of their songs was part of the soundtrack of the movie Cannonball Run 2, and that year they also released their first Portuguese album, Mania, and they went on tour in the US in 1984, selling out each date of the tour. Also that year, in 1984, Ricky graduated from Menudo, and he was the only one who lasted 7 years in the group. He was the one who lasted longest, and he had a massive graduation concert. And when he left, he was replaced by someone you might have heard of, Ricky Martin, at age 13. Their popularity expanded to the Philippines, Japan, other parts in Asia. It was pretty much all over America, and they just started to move to parts of Europe, parts of Asia. They had ads with Pepsi, Scope, McDonald's, and Crest. They appeared even on like Sesame Street and Nickelodeon. In 1987, Menudo switched to a rock concept, but it was not as successful as their previous eras, and Robbie Rosa left. And he was like the vocal and the soul of the group, right? So this 1987 was when Menudo started to fall out of fame. They released an album called Los Últimos Héroes, which sold 40,000 copies in the US, and it brought them back to the spotlight for a while. By the 1990s, Ricky Martin left the group, new members joined, and after a couple years there were a lot of changes. And it was during this time, in the 90s, that the group went through a series of scandals that made them lose the support from their fans and the public. There was this incident in Miami where the group was in the airport, and they found the green stuff in their luggage, in the luggage of 2 of the members whose names were Sergio and Ruben. This event was a catastrophe. Their names were everywhere, people were talking, people were judging them, people could not believe that these underage kids would have drugs in their possessions. And this ended up in the expulsion of both members. And this is a moment where the first signs of the well-kept secrets of abuse started to come to light. Eventually, all of the members left the group, And in 1999, the 21st generation of the group was created with all new members. They continued to create hits all over America, especially during this time in Peru and Panama. After 1995, the group was rebranded to a young adult concept. The name was changed to MDO, and the group no longer had an age limit. In 1997, Diaz sold the rights to Menudo but stayed the manager of MDO. All the group members will keep changing and then made some even reality shows to pick the next members of MDO, but the popularity was never what it was. And technically to this day the group has not ended or disbanded, it's just on a hiatus. In my opinion, the moment power, money, and children are combined, nothing good will come out. Since 1991, the public had suspicions about Diaz, but back then topics like child exploitation were something of a taboo, and no one liked to even mention those topics. And this allowed predators to be rampant in the entertaining business. There had already been headlines and rumors about the abuse some of the members endured during the time in the group. But it wasn't until 2014 that the first testimony was made public, and the first one to speak out was Roy Rossello. We'll come back to this later, okay, keep it in mind, but let's jump to 2015, when Angelo Garcia talked about his abuse in the show Suelta la Ropa. He said that Diaz was guilty of child exploitation. The workload was not healthy for a child. I was always sick, with asthma and a sore throat. We could not sleep or eat well. We didn't have time for that. He also told the story of how, at a concert in Venezuela in 1990, told Diaz that he felt a lot of pain in his abdomen. Diaz didn't believe him and said, "You just don't want to work." Later, had to run out of the stage as they were performing, and he fell to the ground. He began vomiting blood and soon passed out. He was rushed to the hospital and was diagnosed with appendicitis and had an emergency surgery. He almost died. After this, his mom decided to remove him from the group. Then in 2020, tragedy arrived when ex-member Anthony Galindo, who was in the group around 1991 and later joined again when the group was rebranded to MDO, died after complications from an attempt on himself. He had been dealing with depression due to the pandemic and how much it was affecting his career. It was known that he had been dealing with mental issues since his days in the group. Another ex-member, Rawi Torres, talked in 2020 of how he had also considered ending his life and how shocking and painful the death of Anthony was. He talked of how the verbal abuse the members endured affected them so much, even decades later. I won't tell you the exact words, but another way to say it is, "You are trash," was what Diaz would tell him and his members. Children. Literal children. Rawi explains how this behavior affected all of them, all generations, and pushed some of them to cope with substances. He also told more details about what happened when Sergio and Ruben were arrested. It was a traumatic experience, seeing how your members are being arrested and knowing that they are going to be expelled from the group. They are your friends, you are together every day, and suddenly you have to live through something like that. Drugs were something that was happening in Menudo when I was there. Hidden, but always there. Diaz decided to expel them immediately to save the reputation of the group, and forbid the members from talking or making any kind of contact with them. A year later, the remaining 5 members quit the group, due to the injustice the 2 previous members had suffered. Then, later that year, in October of 2020, Jonathan Montenegro also spoke against the violence and abuse that happened in the group. He said, "One time I had to lock myself in the bathroom because I saw how one member was being beaten violently by Diaz because we had been playing with markers and accidentally stained a leather couch. That was my first moment of fear. I was only 11. There were situations that are not justifiable. I had hepatitis and still had to work. It is known that you can have liver failure if you don't take precautions, but our schedule was packed and could not be changed. Also, in 2020, a couple days before Jonathan spoke, a documentary was released called Súbete a mi moto, created by Amazon. It tells the story of Menudo through the perspective of Edgardo Diaz. It has a total of 15 episodes. Jonathan also said in his interview that no member had been contacted to verify anything, and described it as fantasy. Many members also expressed anger towards the documentary. René Ferrite called it comedy and said that it was far from reality and that the truth would be known soon. In July of 2022, Gabriel Fernandez, who was a trainee for Menudo and was part of it for only a couple weeks, spoke in an interview about the reason he was removed from the group. He tells the story of how he was selected in an audition when he was about to turn 14 years old. After a couple weeks, he was invited to travel to Aruba. There he trained with the group for a presentation. He tells the story. We were staying at a farm in front of the sea, and it had many rooms and each member was staying in one. One day, the choreographer and Diaz arrived from Venezuela. They told me I cannot stay there anymore because they need the room for someone else. They told him he had to go to a hotel, but no other member was asked to leave. I started to feel strange. Why was I the only one who had to leave? When we get to the hotel, things get more strange. They tell me there is only one room available and that both the choreographer and Diaz were going to share the room with me. They told me I had to share the bed with Diaz. As soon as we sit on the bed, Diaz begins telling me of how much he needs love and care. That moment, I knew something was very wrong. I ran out of the room crying, sat in the hallway, and stayed there. I didn't sleep. By the next day, he was on a flight to Venezuela and was no longer part of Menudo because of bad attitude. The year prior, in 2021, the world heard the terrible news that Rey Reyes passed away at the age of 51 from a heart attack. He had been dealing with heart problems and depression. During this time, he had been working on a book where he was going to reveal everything, with proof and testimony from many ex-members. Gabriel had also participated in the book. So far, nothing else has been said about the book, and it is really sad to think that it might never reach the public like Rey wanted. Then in June of 2022, a documentary produced by HBO Max called Menudo Forever Young was released. This 4-part docuseries focuses on the members' experiences and dives deep into what really happened. 16 ex-members were part of the documentary, telling their own story. In this documentary, Angelo Garcia shared more about what he went through. He told how the abuse happened for the first time. He was in his hotel room when a man entered his room and gave him alcohol. All I remember is that I passed out. When I woke up, I was naked and bleeding. I understood what he had done to me. I had burn marks on my face from the carpet. I was abused many times. That was how those predators took advantage of me. Sergio Blas also talked about his experiences in the documentary. One time we were in Colombia. Me and Ruben were in our room at a hotel when suddenly an unknown man entered. He offered us substances and we got really scared. He turned out to be one of the producers. All this exploitation and negligence happened under the strict ruling of Diaz, who was not only the main perpetrator, but also the connection to many other abusers that he would often call promoters. We were only playing cards for his business, said Rey Acevedo. The ex-members have also spoken about bullying and abuse by other members as well. Diaz knew about this and didn't do anything to stop it or help him. Something that surprised me is that Roy Rosello was not part of the documentary. As I said before, he was the first one to talk publicly about what had happened back in 2014, and it was during an interview in a show called Domingo Show, and he confirmed that the producer had abused him and his members on multiple occasions. He said that he was only going to talk about his experiences, but he knew of at least 2 or 3 other members that had been abused. He told a specific event in 1984 when he was 13, when they were taken to a party in a mansion in Puerto Rico. Someone told him that Diaz wanted to see him in his room. He says that he knew what he wanted, and he had tried to refuse many times before, but Diaz would threaten to kick him off the group. Every time he would remember his family and how he was doing it to give his family a home and a better life. At 13 years old, knowing that he was going to be abused, but having to think that he was providing for his family to make himself do it. Like, think of how horrible the situation was. For a 13-year-old to be thinking that he has to sacrifice himself, his safety, just to provide for his family. He says that when he went up to the room, he saw Diaz with Ricky Martin, who was also 13, by the way, dressed as a girl. He panicked and he called for Robbie, and then Robbie punched Diaz in the face. And while a fight began, Roy ran out of the mansion and sat on the road, hoping for a car to run him over. Right after this interview in the show, Diaz put out a statement denying everything, saying that his work was unquestionable and that many families had trusted him through his many projects, and that he was not going to spend the rest of his life defending himself from accusations. Then, in 2020, he gave another interview in which he said that he was going to press charges against Diaz in the United States. In this interview, he spoke about how the abuse started even before joining Menudo. He said that he was the only member of Menudo who didn't have to audition. He lived a couple blocks away from the main office of Diaz in Puerto Rico. One time, when the group was there, he stood outside, like he just was standing out there, and many fans began surrounding him thinking that he was a new member. Diaz noticed and sent an assistant to ask him to audition. Soon after, Diaz began grooming him. Roy was often invited to Diaz's mother's house. Her name was Doña Panchi. Well, her nickname. Apparently, she was the one in charge of the relationship with the parents of the children. In that house, Diaz would give Roy gifts and promises of fame, and it was at that house that the abuse began for Roy. He affirms that Doña Panchi was aware of what her son was doing, and she was against Roy joining the group. She was afraid that Roy would one day talk about what had happened, and Roy says that he could hear both arguing and yelling in the living room while he was locked in Diaz's room. I got into Menudo because Edgardo saw me and fell in love with me. He said that he has witnesses and proof of the cruelty. One day, Diaz arrived at my home with a suitcase and the contract. I ran to my room and hid in the closet. I was desperate. I was crying and screaming to my mom to please not let me go with that man. I knew what was going to happen to me. Diaz came to the closet and said, "Come on, Roy. I promise you and your mother that I will take care of you like my own son." My mom begged me, saying, "Please do it for me, for your siblings, for the family, to give us a better life." I came out crying, signed the contract, and made my bags. My mom didn't know she was giving me to my abuser. Since the documentary came out of Forever Young, Ricky Martin has not commented on anything. And at the point of making this video, I was not able to find any kind of news or record about any legal proceedings against Diaz by a Menudo ex-member, but the situation seems far from over. Even when all members worked hard to create one of the most popular boy groups in the world, their lives have been difficult ever since. They have stated that the pay was too low and some of them struggled to even have a place to live after. There are some that refuse to talk about the topic at all. During the years, some of the members have come together on a few occasions for reunion concerts and even tours. It seems like the bonds and friendships have been able to endure the pass of time and the hardships they went through. But after 12 years, Menudo is coming back under a new management and team, including Mario Lopez. So this is being created by Menudo Productions, which is owned by Menudo International LLC, which purchased the rights to the Menudo brand back in 2016. Industry veteran Angel Zamora says, "A completely new team to discover and develop the next generation of superstars is the honor of a lifetime." Menudo's production CEO, Paul Tarnopol, says about the project, "Our management team is committed to the safety, well-being, and financial security of each and every member of Menudo. This is what we mean by a new beginning." This project was first announced in July of 2022 and set the date for auditions on September 17. But checking their social media, it seems like they have very little engagement, getting only over 1,000 views on their audition announcement videos, and their posts have not gathered that much attention either. In January 18 of 2023, their new logo was introduced and videos from the auditions have been posted. 5 new members have been selected and will be announced soon. I guess we will have to wait and see how this project goes. Could be that it has been overshadowed by recent allegations, and that's why it has not been able to track a lot of attention. Hopefully, they will learn from the past and the children will be protected. It seems to be their main focus, but history tends to repeat itself, sadly. That's it for today's video. Tell me in the comments what you think, or if you have ever heard of this group before. I really recommend watching Forever Young on HBO to get a full idea of what they really went through. I obviously had to censor many parts, but still try to tell the full picture. Thank you for watching, and see you in my next video. Bye bye!